Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Carla. Are there any INXS fans in the room? For those of you that didn't put your hand up, please leave. You're not keeping me accustomed to the lifestyle that I love. Now, when my husband and I first met, it was back in the year 2002, we were set up on a blind date. And it was set up by a guy called John Stevens. Anyone familiar with Noiseworks? Yes, okay. Anyone think John Stevens hot? Yeah, so did I. So when I was standing in front of the stage, there was John Stevens, there was Kirk Pengilly. Now, I'd been a fan of INXS since I was 14 years of age. So I knew kind of what I was getting into, but not really. And I remember standing in front of the stage, and I was looking at Kirk, and I was looking at John. I'm like, John, you're so hot. Kirk, you're so not. How I had made a promise to John. Now I'm a woman of my word, and I made a promise to John that I would take Kirk on a date. And when we first met that night at that particular function, all the memories of INXS came flooding back. I mean, the first concert I ever went to was, as a 14-year-old, was an INXS show. The first record I ever bought was an INXS record. So I couldn't be the fangirl. I had to also remember that the first concert I went to as a 14-year-old, my future husband was 30 on stage. So I had to he was 28. I had to recognise that there was, a whole lot of lives that had been lived in that period of time. But when I went up to meet Kirk and meet him for the first time, I considered him to be quite rude, because he's like, hi, hey, so great to meet you, but then would turn around and start talking to somebody else. I was like, oh, this guy's pretty disrespectful. And then I continued to persevere. I gave up. I went over to John to say goodnight. Plenty of events had transpired through the night. But then I went over to say goodbye to John, and Kirk was standing with John. And John's like, oh, Layne, Kirk, meet Layne. I'm like, yeah, we've met. So he made us go to the bar and have a drink. And of course, the first things we started speaking about are things you're not meant to speak about when you first meet. So, how long have you been single? What happened to the previous relationship? Was it amicable? All these things. In the end, Kirk and I went on a date. I took him 10-pin bowling at DYRSL. And then I took him to a restaurant in DY. And we spent a week together. And I must admit, there was no connection, there was no chemistry, there was really nothing that we had in common. We really didn't want to be with each other. First date, I went to the bathroom looking for a window to climb out of. And while I'm in the bathroom, he's thinking of leaving money on the table and doing a runner. So you can see there's a lot of chemistry here. But ultimately, we pursued and we persevered because the owner of the restaurant presented us with a bottle of limoncello. Now, I'm not saying that limoncello is the solution to everyone's problems here this morning, but I must admit, if it wasn't for limoncello, Kirk and I wouldn't be together. Now, the reason I'm telling you this random story is that we sometimes wait until everything's perfect before we take action. And as JK mentioned this morning, we actually just have to learn to trust in our instincts and trust in our ability to navigate our way, because that's where confidence truly comes from. The belief in our ability to figure it out as we go. There's not a workbook or a manual for being a parent. There's certainly not a workbook or a manual to cater to all evidence or all experiences of mental health. But what we do need to understand is that we need to have compassion. Now, when Kirk and I first got together, he referred to me as a refrigerated caramello koala. Does everyone love caramello koalas? Yeah. Do you like them refrigerated, or do you like them room temperature? Room temperature, right. Well, I was a refrigerated caramello. What he meant by that was I had a very tough exterior and a very warm, gooey centre. But it took a lot to get through that tough exterior. And I actually prided myself on being tough. Now, as an 8-year-old, I set the goal to become a world champion surfer. And as I was so warmly introduced, everyone loves Layne. Well, that was essentially my objective. And I know you don't all love me, but that doesn't really matter. But what does matter is having a better understanding of what's driving us, what's driving our behaviours. Now, as an 8-year-old, that's when my dad decided to sit me down and tell me I was adopted. And it was that experience that was the catalyst moment in my life. For anyone that's experienced adoption on any level, from my personal experience, it was traumatic. Because I sat on that couch feeling like Alice in Wonderland. And my dad, in his compassionate, heartfelt ways, was saying, you're my baby girl. You've always belonged to this family. We always wanted you as part of this family. However, you're not of blood relation. My response to that is, I've been rejected, I'm undeserving of love. My own mother didn't want me. And it felt really challenging. It was so all-consuming that I remember feeling like the couch was swallowing me whole. And I set the goal in that moment. I became aware of how I was feeling, and I thought, I know if I become a world champion, everyone will love me. Now, I know that doesn't manifest itself in that way, but that, as an 8-year-old, is what drove me to become a world champion. Now, like you, actually, let's ask the question. Who here believes success has to be hard? Be honest. Who here believes success has to be hard? See, the thing is that when you answer that question with absolute honesty, you get a reflection or a mirror image of what you believe to be true. A lot of us don't know what we believe to be true, yet our lives are constant reflections of what we believe to be true. I believe success has to be hard. I once believed, that to achieve something deserving of celebration and recognition, it had to be endured through pain, suffering, and struggle. So what that meant was, I put on that tough caramello koala exterior, and I know I had this very gooey, warm center inside me, but I wasn't willing to allow that part of me to be seen because I saw that as a sign of weakness. It wasn't an illness, it was a weakness. And so that essentially became my armor. So when I decided as a 14-year-old I'm going to become a world champion surfer, you might remember I didn't actually say I wanted to become a world champion surfer at 8. I wanted to become a world champion in everything I did. I obviously lacked confidence as a child. When I turned 14, I decided I was going to become a world champion surfer. I came dead last in every event I competed in. I also encountered the hostility, threats, and challenges that the ocean had. Then the guys paddled out. And it was even more threatening and challenging and hostile. Growing up in Manly, the most appropriately named beach in the world, taught me the importance to stand up and fight for what I believed in. So I can find plenty of validation and proof points to confirm my belief that to achieve something, it has to be endured through pain, suffering, and struggle. I can look at my peers who gave me a hard time and criticism. I can point to all my losses, all of my defeats, all of my injuries, all of my illnesses, from chronic fatigue syndrome to having a wave crush the back of my lower back and fold me in half and crush my lumbar spine, to having this beautiful smile line on my face, which is actually my board smashing me in the face and splitting it apart. I can find plenty of proof points to prove to myself that if I hadn't been through these challenges, if I wasn't that tough, refrigerated caramello, I would not have achieved what I wanted to achieve. Yet upon reflection, I can now tell you that coming from a place of compassion is the strongest place that we can learn to come from. I'm a 7-time world champion. I won 6 of them consecutively. I'm the only surfer in the world to have won 6 consecutive world titles. That's right, not even King Kelly could do that. But what you may not know about me is I won 5 world titles in a state of fear, and I only won 2 world titles in a state of love. Those world titles were world title number 1 and world title number 7. Number 1 and number 7 were different because coming from a place of love for me means coming from a place of compassion, coming from a place of falling in love with process and detaching from outcome. When we talk about mental health, we want the silver bullet. We want the immediate, we want it to be solved immediately. But when I think about those 5 world titles, I was tagged as having the compassion of a tiger shark. I was so fierce, I was so focused, I was so driven that literally if a competitor came in my way, I didn't see them as on the way, I saw them as in my way. I would bite them, I would let them bleed out, and I would swim off and go and win another heat, another contest, another world title, without any compassion for them. But the way that we behave and the way that we talk to people says a lot more about us than it does about the people that we're interacting with. Not only did I lack compassion for others, but seriously, it was a direct reflection of the lack of compassion that I had for myself. And this is what inspired me to create Awake Academy. It's a portal for self-empowerment, and self-compassion is where it all starts. Now, compassion is recognizing that we're going through a hard time and then caring for ourselves enough that we respond in a kind way, free of harsh judgment or criticism. Like putting your hand on your heart and saying, Layne, you've got this, it's okay. Or immersing myself in the ocean, or going for a walk through the bush, or just taking 3 deliberate deep breaths. These really simple interventions, self-care interventions, settle our system. And when we settle our system, we feel much more grounded and solid. We all have the capacity to do these little things, yet we overcomplicate what we need to do to care for ourselves. So when I won my 6th consecutive world title, that very tough, refrigerated caramello koala was on fire. She was also very broken. Her gooey centre was kind of going through all sorts of broken feet and heads and ears. I was adrenally fatigued. I was completely worn out, but I was convincing myself this is the only way it has to be achieved. And then my body broke down. I had a wave that was rather large land on the back of my neck in the year 2001. It made my left arm go numb instantly. It herniated a disc in my neck, and I ignored it for 5 years. I surfed with immense amount of pain and discomfort. Sometimes I'd wake up feeling paralyzed, like there was a blunt butter knife being wedged between my shoulder blades, just slowly twisted. Sounds fabulous. But that's what I believed I had to endure to achieve happiness and success. I won my 6th world title. I felt like I was enough now. And then I thought, no, I've got more in the tank. Let's go and do it again. So I ignored the symptoms. And here's the main lesson that we all need to learn about ourselves and about the people who we want to help. The body whispers before it screams. The body whispers before it screams, yet we wait until our body is screaming at us before we do anything about it. It's like the petrol light coming on our fuel tank on our car, and we try and put the foot to the floor to see if we can get another 150 Ks out of that thing. We do the same thing with our bodies. What about when our phones are starting to die? What do we do then? We run straight to the wall and we plug it in, but our bodies we neglect, we abuse. So when my body started screaming at me, I had to take 6 months out. Now for most people, any avid athlete like me who just loves surfing, and I still do to this day, having 6 months out of the water was the worst case scenario for me. But instead of ignoring my feelings, suppressing my feelings, instead of dishonoring how I felt, I embraced it. And that's what we need to learn to do about mental health issues and challenges, is if we can learn to embrace how we feel, then we can transmute the feeling. If we learn how to honor our feelings, we can then process it a lot faster. So I honored the fact that I was broken. I also honored the fact now that I'm out of the fridge. I'm starting to melt. I honored the fact that I needed to soften. I had to soften my approach to my own mental health and physical well-being and emotional health. I had to soften. I had to take responsibility. I had to be my own honesty barometer, my own accountability partner. And so in those 6 months, I invested every ounce of my being into healing my body. And I found so many different methodologies to personal, physical, emotional, and mental healing. And these are some of the things that I share in my online courses. Helping people be more centered, more connected, more confident. So when I came back to compete for my 7th world title, I was now a truly room-temperatured caramello koala. I was not defined by what I did. I was not defined by how I competed or how I performed or the results that I produced in my life. I decided, I chose, who am I? How do I feel? How do I want to show up today? What impact do I want to make? What difference do I want to make? I took full responsibility and full accountability to the point now I can honestly say that I'm more caramel than I am chocolate. I prided myself on being that strong, tenacious, resilient, refrigerated caramello. I prided myself on being strong because our culture primes us to believe that to be strong, you have to be hard on yourself. But that lack of compassion leads to being more broken. So when it comes to mental health, emotional well-being, physical health, when it comes to our health, we just have to learn to prioritize it and recognize that our body whispers before it screams, and then learn to tune into that conversation, to lean into that conversation, to honour how we're feeling, and to make it okay to not be okay. That's why I'm such a proud ambassador for mental health organisations such as Are You OK? And that's why I'm proud to be standing on this stage, sharing these stories and igniting these conversations to empower all of you to help the people that you know so desperately need your help. Self-compassion can literally come from within. Our body responds to care. It doesn't have to always come from outside of us. It can come from within us. Whether it's taking a simple breath, having the courage to put your hand up and say, I'm not okay, or just having the courage to lean into how you feel. Just remember that choice, not chance, determines your destiny. And we need to make better choices about who we are, how we feel, and how we want to show up. And if you want to learn more about how I can help you do that, I'll be over in the networking area. I don't drink coffee. Can you imagine me on caffeine? Holy shit, that would be crazy. But I'd love to have a chat with you after this session. So thank you very much, and wishing you all the very best. Thank you.